My knuckles were white against the door of Michael's Florida home. It was a strange, unsettling quiet that greeted me, one that didn't belong to a house supposedly filled with life. The doorbell, with its cheerful, chirping bird sound, echoed into a void, a silence that felt heavy and wrong. I had flown down from Massachusetts without a word, a sudden impulse that felt less like a visit and more like a premonition. The last time I had spoken to my son, his voice had sounded thin, stretched too tight, like a rubber band about to snap. He'd said he was under the weather, but my heart, that old stubborn organ, knew better. It knew the difference between a cold and a lie. I fumbled for the spare key they kept under a ceramic garden gnome, a silly thing Jessica had insisted on, saying it brought whimsy to the porch. The lock clicked, and a wave of cool, air-conditioned air, thick with the scent of stale lilies and something faintly medicinal, washed over me. I stepped inside, the tile floor cold against my worn leather loafers. The house was immaculate, almost disturbingly so. A magazine lay perfectly centered on the coffee table. A crystal bowl of lemons on the kitchen counter looked like an artist's rendering, untouched. It was the kind of order that screamed of absence, not presence. "Michael? Jessica?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the quiet. No answer. I walked through the living room, my mind racing. Where were they? A pang of irritation shot through me. This was so unlike Michael. He was a creature of habit, a homebody. He wouldn't just be gone. I climbed the grand staircase, my hand trailing along the polished wood banister. It felt foreign, not like the old, splintered banister in our house back in Boston, the one I had polished with my own hands for 50 years. My breath caught in my throat as I reached the landing. Michael's bedroom door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of light escaped from the crack, and with it, a low, rasping sound. I pushed the door open, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sight that greeted me froze me in place. My son, my strong, vibrant Michael, lay in the center of his bed, his body a frail, hollowed-out version of the man I knew. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over the sharp angles of his face. An IV line was taped to his arm, and a machine beside the bed hissed and beeped with a rhythmic, impersonal cadence. He was breathing, but it was a labored, rattling breath, each one a struggle. My first thought was a scream, but no sound came out. My body felt like it was made of lead. Michael was dying. There was no other way to put it. Panic and rage battled inside me. Where was Jessica? Why she left him like this? I searched the room, my eyes frantically scanning for some sign, some explanation. On the nightstand, beside an empty glass of water, lay a small, elegantly scripted card. It was an invitation. Join us for an evening of luxury and philanthropy on the endless summer, a moonlight cruise to benefit a cause close to our hearts. Below it, in Jessica's familiar, loopy handwriting, was a brief note. "Mom, Michael is sleeping. See you on the yacht. Don't wait up. XOXO." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My son was lying here, suffering, perhaps even at death's door. And his wife? His wife was on a yacht, toasting to luxury and philanthropy. The words on the card felt like a slap. Philanthropy? What about charity beginning at home? The image of her sipping champagne in a glamorous dress while my boy lay here broke something inside me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a profound, soul-deep cruelty. I stumbled out of the room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. It felt like a fever dream, an ugly distortion of reality. My son's phone, I realized. I found it on the charger, and for a moment my conscience wavered. But a mother's fury is a powerful thing, and it quickly silenced the quiet voice of doubt. I scrolled through his contacts, found my darling Jess, and located her banking app. I had seen her use it before, a few taps and a fingerprint. It was the digital age, a world my husband Robert had never quite understood. He believed in cold, hard cash and hidden accounts, secrets kept in plain sight. I had a few of those myself, set aside over the years for a rainy day, for a moment of quiet rebellion I never thought I'd need. I opened my own banking app, a secret one not even Robert had known about, a small hedge fund he had started for me years ago, for a woman's whimsy, he had told me with a wink. The irony now was like a shard of glass in my heart. My own whimsy was about to become Jessica's undoing. I found her account number, the one she'd given to Michael, and with a few clicks, I transferred a significant sum, enough to trigger an investigation and freeze her accounts. A small notification popped up on the screen, a confirmation of a large, unusual transfer, followed by an immediate lock on all her linked cards. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I had just taken her world and turned it upside down, all without a word. The quiet in the house seemed to deepen, but it was no longer heavy. It was a satisfying stillness, a pause before the storm. I walked back to Michael's room, a different woman than the one who had entered. The old pain was still there, but now it was a cold, hard knot of resolve. She had wanted to play games with my family? Fine. I knew how to play. I sat in a chair beside Michael's bed, my hand gently resting on his. I watched his chest rise and fall, listened to the gentle wheezing of his breath. The revenge I had just taken felt like a cool balm on a fresh wound. And yet, in the back of my mind, a small, nagging voice whispered. It spoke of a past I had tried to forget, a painful mistake of my own. I pushed it down. Right now, there was only this moment, this righteous fury, and the knowledge that somewhere out on the dark ocean, a champagne flute had just dropped. The silence lasted for what felt like an eternity, punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of Michael's bedside machine and the low hum of the air conditioning. It was a powerful, beautiful silence, the kind that follows a lightning strike, a moment of profound cosmic recalibration. I sat there, my hand still on Michael's, a grim satisfaction coiling in my gut. I imagined her face when she tried to pay for another round of drinks, a new cocktail dress, or a taxi back home. That little jolt of power was intoxicating. I had spent my life as a gentle wife and a doting mother, the kind of woman who baked cookies and polished silverware, a background character in my own family's grand narrative. Now, in this dark, silent room, I had just played my first hand, and it was a royal flush. The phone rang. The screen flashed my darling Jess. I let it ring, and ring, and ring again. I watched her picture flash on the screen, her perfect blonde hair, her too bright smile. The image of her laughing on that yacht danced in my head, fueling the fire. The phone went silent for a moment before a different number showed up. Her friends, I presumed. I swiped to answer. "Evelyn, what the heck did you do?" Jessica's voice was a high-pitched shriek, an unfamiliar sound that was a far cry from her usual, carefully modulated tones. "My cards are all declined. My accounts are blocked. The bank said it was a suspicious financial transfer, and my account is locked." I leaned closer to the phone, my voice low and steady. "Hello, Jessica. I'm glad you're enjoying your evening." There was a moment of shocked silence. She hadn't expected me to be so calm. I could hear the background noise of music and distant chatter, the gentle rocking of the boat. I pictured her, her expensive dress, her glass of champagne, and all of it had just become so much dead weight. "Enjoying it? I'm stranded. We can't even get off the boat. The company won't take cash. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? What is wrong with you?" "Nothing is wrong with me, Jessica," I said, my voice as cold as the January air in Boston. "But I think there's something very, very wrong with you." The line went silent again. The music and chatter in the background faded, and I could hear her ragged breathing, a sound that was suddenly so much more human than her carefully crafted persona. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, the confidence gone from her voice. I think you do. And until you get back here and explain yourself, everything you own will remain out of reach. Welcome home, Jessica. I hung up the phone and set it on the nightstand right beside Michael's. I leaned back in the chair, a deep sigh escaping my lips. It was done. The initial shock and fury were giving way to a strange emptiness. The righteous anger that had fueled my actions was now a cold, hollow shell. It felt good, yes, but it didn't feel right. My vengeance felt too simple, too clean. It didn't account for the look on her face when she had screamed. It didn't account for the sudden, raw vulnerability in her voice. The cold calculation was satisfying, but it had left a hole. This story, I realized, was so much more than a simple act of revenge. It was a confession, a testament to what a mother will do for her son, and what a woman will do when she feels she has been wronged. It was a story about the messy, complicated truths that hide behind perfect facades. If you're following along, if any of this resonates with you, you'll understand why I feel compelled to share every single moment of it. Because sometimes the ugliest truths are the ones that save us. And what was about to happen would change everything I thought I knew. I had pulled the pin on a grenade, but I was about to learn that the one it would explode in was my own life, and I had no idea what to do next. But the truth about that party, about the person I thought Jessica was, that was the real shock. And I still didn't have the full picture. My revenge had just set me on a course to find it. I just wasn't sure I would survive the journey. The knock on the door came just after sunrise. It wasn't the gentle, polite knock of a neighbor, but a series of sharp, frantic raps, as if the person on the other side was trying to beat their way in. I had barely slept, sitting in the armchair beside Michael's bed, listening to the rhythmic hum of the machines and the quiet, rattling sound of his breathing. The house felt like a tomb, cold and airless. My mind, however, was in a storm. The fury of the night before had subsided, leaving a cold, hard stone of dread in my stomach. I had acted, but I had acted on an assumption. Now the moment of truth was here. I went downstairs, a slow, deliberate creak of my feet on the polished stairs. I didn't rush. Rushing was for those who are unsure of themselves. I reached the front door and opened it a crack. Jessica stood there, looking utterly disheveled. The glamorous dress she had worn to the yacht was now crumpled and stained. Her beautiful blonde hair was a mess, strands sticking out in every direction. Her face was smudged with what looked like mascara streaks and tears. She wasn't the polished, poised woman from the pictures. She was just a girl, and a very, very angry one. "Evelyn, you have to unlock my accounts, right now," she spat, her voice a raw, hoarse whisper. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of a kind of calculating charm, were red-rimmed and bloodshot. I opened the door wider, leaning against the frame. "Good morning, Jessica. Did you have a nice cruise?" My voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. It was my mother's voice, the one she used when a problem needed to be managed, not reacted to. It was the adult voice from the psychological playbooks, and I was using it to great effect. She flinched as if I had struck her. "How can you be so cruel? Do you know what you did? I had to borrow money from a total stranger just to get a taxi home. I was humiliated in front of everyone. And what do you call leaving your husband, my son, to die alone in his bed while you were off drinking champagne?" I shot back, my voice still low, but with an icy edge that cut through her hysteria. She reeled back, her hand flying to her mouth, and her anger seemed to drain away, replaced by something like shock. "He's not dying. He's resting. The doctor said he needed rest." "What doctors? What is wrong with him, Jessica? The note said you were on a philanthropic cruise. Philanthropy for what? Or was it just a convenient excuse to escape? My questions came fast and sharp, one after the other, a torrent of doubt and accusation that had been building inside me all night. She crumbled, her shoulders slumping. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "None of it. You don't understand what we've been going through." Just then, a small, efficient woman in a crisp white nurse's uniform walked down the hallway. Her name was Sarah. She had been here last night, in the room with Michael, a quiet, almost invisible presence. She carried a small tray with an empty IV bag and a few medical implements. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of green, met mine for just a second. I saw no judgment in them, only a deep, weary sadness. Her gaze flickered to Jessica, and for a brief, fleeting moment, her lips pursed in a thin line of sympathy, a gesture so quick I might have imagined it. But I didn't. It was a tiny crack in the facade I had built, a hint that my reality might not be the real one. Jessica saw me looking at the nurse, her face hardened again, her jaw tightening. She quickly wiped her eyes, pulling herself back together. "Look, Evelyn, you have to unlock them. I have things to do. The bank said it will be a week before they can investigate. We can't afford that." "Afford what, Jessica? A new dress? Another boat party?" I said, my voice rising a little. The shame and doubt I was feeling was being quickly masked by my old anger. It was easier to be angry than to face the possibility that I had done something terrible. "No, you old fool," she cried, her voice raw with a sudden devastating fury. "Afford his medicine, the medicine they have to ship in from Germany. Do you think that comes cheap?" She said the words with such force, such unvarnished desperation, that they hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. Michael's medicine? The words echoed in my head, a new piece of the puzzle that made no sense at all. This wasn't a girl who had been selfishly partying. This was a woman on the edge. Her raw pain, her exhaustion, her desperation, it was all suddenly so very real. My mind, which had been so quick to judge, felt like a child's toy that had just been shattered. I looked at her, really looked at her, not as a symbol of my anger, but as a living, breathing woman. My daughter-in-law. Her eyes were pleading, her face a roadmap of 1,000 sleepless nights. She was a different person than the one I had known, and I suddenly felt a sick certainty in my gut that I had just punished her for a crime she did not commit. I had no idea what her philanthropy really meant, and the thought of it made me nauseous. My body went cold, from the tips of my fingers to the pit of my stomach. Everything I had been so sure of, everything I had used to justify my cold act of revenge, was suddenly a crumbling ruin, and I knew, with the kind of terrible certainty that only comes from deep down, that the truth was far worse than the lies, and that I had to find it. The next few hours passed in a daze. Jessica retreated to her room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my crushing, terrible guilt. The house was silent again, but this time the quiet was oppressive, filled with the ghosts of my own bad judgments. The scent of stale lilies felt like an accusation. I sat in the living room listening to the tick of a grandfather clock that hadn't worked since Robert died, but which somehow felt more alive than I did in that moment. What had I done? What was I missing? I couldn't shake the image of Sarah, the nurse, and her brief, knowing look. I knew instinctively that she held the key to this mystery. After what felt like an eternity, I went back upstairs. Michael was sleeping peacefully, his breathing a little more even than before. I found Sarah in the kitchen, meticulously cleaning medical equipment. The professionalism and quiet grace of her movements were a stark contrast to the chaos I had just caused. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper, I need to ask you something." She turned, her clear green eyes meeting mine. "You're upset, Mrs. Reed? That's understandable." She spoke softly, her tone compassionate but firm. I can't discuss a patient's medical information, of course, but I can tell you what I've seen. I nodded, gripping the edge of the counter. Tell me about Jessica and the yacht and the medicine? She paused, drying the small instrument with a clean cloth. Mrs. Reed, what you saw wasn't what it seemed. For the last 6 months, Michael has been fighting a battle that most people wouldn't survive a week of. It's a progressive neuromuscular disease. It's rare. The treatments are experimental and they cost a small fortune. One dose of the new treatment they found in Germany is more than a year's worth of my salary. My knees felt weak. I sat down on a bar stool, my mind racing. But the yacht? The party? Sarah's gaze softened. The yacht party was a desperate, last-ditch effort. Jessica's been trying to get a meeting with a man named Mr. Harrington, a philanthropist who made his money in medical research. She's been trying for months to get him to see Michael's case. She's tried everything. The yacht was his idea. It was an exclusive fundraiser for a charity he supports. She was there to try and get a few minutes alone with him. She wasn't there to party. The note she left you was to protect you. Michael didn't want you to know the full truth of how bad things were. He was afraid you would worry. The truth was a physical blow, a punch to the gut. The world I had constructed in my mind, a world of shallow materialism and cruel indifference, had crumbled to dust. The glamorous yacht party, the selfish drinking, the neglectful wife, it had all been a carefully orchestrated illusion, a desperate act of love. Jessica wasn't neglecting him. She was fighting for him in the only way she knew how. She was doing something I hadn't even thought of doing, looking for a miracle, not just waiting for the end. She was a warrior, and I had just shot her in the back. My mind reeled. The philanthropy on the card wasn't a cruel joke. It was the entire purpose. Every insult, every accusation I had hurled at her last night, every moment of righteous anger I had felt, it was all a profound, humiliating mistake. I had judged her, accused her, and punished her based on a single, misinterpreted piece of evidence. I had acted on emotion, not logic. The parent voice in me had been so loud, so convinced of its own righteousness, that it had drowned out the quiet adult voice that had tried to warn me. My vision blurred with tears of shame. I remembered sitting beside Michael last night, filled with a smug sense of victory, a cold, hard knot of resolve. But the knot wasn't made of strength. It was made of a terrible ignorance. I had prided myself on my quiet strength, on the secret fund Robert had left me, but I had used that strength to do something so petty and so cruel. Jessica, the woman I had just accused of being a gold digger, was a hero, and I was a monster. I had been so sure that she was the villain, so blind in my fury, that I had walked down a false path with such self-righteous certainty. Now, standing in this kitchen, I knew the truth. My life, my view of my son, my view of his wife, and even my view of myself, it had all been a lie. And in that moment, I understood that I was not the hero of this story, but its greatest fool. The quiet in the house now felt like a heavy blanket of unspoken guilt. After Sarah's revelation, I had retreated to Michael's room, watching him sleep with a new kind of despair. The sight of the man I had come to save, the son I had vowed to protect, was now a constant reminder of my profound failure. I had not protected him. I attacked the one person who was fighting for him. The shame was a physical weight on my chest, a cold lump of regret that pulsed with every beat of my heart. I had to face Jessica. The apology I owed her felt like the heaviest burden I had ever carried. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with her head in her hands. The elegant dress from the night before was still crumpled around her, a pathetic, ironic symbol of a night that had gone so wrong. She looked exhausted, broken. The fiery, hysterical woman from a few hours ago was gone, replaced by a ghost of a person. She didn't look up as I approached. The air between us was thick with a silence that was far more painful than her angry words. "Jessica," I began, my voice a dry croak. I had rehearsed the words in my head 100 times, but they felt weak and insufficient now. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting mine. They were red and swollen, but there was a quiet, defeated emptiness in them that I found more terrifying than her earlier fury. "Don't," she said, her voice flat. "I don't have the energy for another one of your speeches." "No," I said, a deep breath steadying me. "Not a speech. An apology. A real one." I took a step closer. "I was wrong about everything. I saw the card and I assumed. I saw you on that yacht and I thought the worst. I thought you were a terrible wife, a selfish girl who cared more about money than my son. But I was wrong, Jessica. Terribly, horribly wrong. You were fighting for him, and I punished you for it. I am so, so sorry." The words hung in the air between us, raw and honest. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to say. My pride, which had been a constant companion for 70 years, felt like a shattered vase at my feet. Jessica said nothing for a long time. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. I waited, my stomach in knots, for the torrent of anger, for the recriminations, for the righteous fury I knew she deserved to feel. But it never came. Instead, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Do you know what that was, that party, Evelyn? That was our last chance, our last desperate hope. We've sold everything, the savings, the retirement funds. We've cashed out everything we had. We've put a second mortgage on this house. I've been selling my jewelry just to pay for the nurses and the medications. The whimsy of this house, the crystal bowls, the perfect magazine on the table. It's all an act, a way to pretend that everything is fine while our world falls apart. Michael didn't want you to know. He didn't want to be a burden, and I swore to him I would find a way. That man, Mr. Harrington, he was our last hope. And you took it away from me. You made me look like a fool. You humiliated me in front of the one person who could have saved us." Her words weren't a storm. They were a quiet, devastating rain. Each one landed like a drop of acid on my soul. My petty act of revenge, which had seemed so glorious just hours before, was now a grotesque monument to my own vanity. I had been so proud of my cleverness, of my little secret fund. I had used my strength to demonstrate my own moral superiority, and in doing so, I had nearly destroyed them. "I have money," I said, the words a lifeline in a sea of despair. "Robert left me a small fund, a sort of rainy day account. It's not much, but it's enough to—" She cut me off with a hollow, bitter laugh. "Enough to what? To pay for a few weeks, a few doses? You have no idea, Evelyn. This isn't just about money. It's about a man's pride. It's about a mother's duty. My mother, my father, they tried to help, but we wouldn't take their charity. We were so proud, just like you. But look where that got us. You're no different from us. You're just a little older and a little colder. You stood there last night, so full of your own self-righteousness. Did you ever consider for a moment that your son's pride was the reason you were kept in the dark?" Her words were like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. Your son's pride. The phrase hung in the air, a bell tolling a forgotten memory. A memory of a different time, a different place, and a different kind of pride. A familiar shame. Not just mine, but mine and Robert's began to rise, a bitter taste in my mouth. I had thought my act was about justice, about truth, but Jessica's quiet, devastating honesty had just revealed a far more complicated truth that reached back decades into my own past.
I felt a sudden, strange coldness, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the chill of a memory rising, unbidden from the depths of my subconscious, a memory of a choice that Robert and I had made long ago, a choice born of that same cold, self-preserving pride. I had stood in judgment of Jessica, a girl I had barely known. But what right did I have when I had already made the very same mistake myself? It was not just her humiliation I had witnessed that night, it was a reflection of my own. I had no idea then just how deep that particular wound went.
Jessica's words, "Your son's pride," had set a domino effect in motion, an unstoppable chain of memories that I had long ago sealed away. My mind didn't just recall one event, it was a flood, a torrent of sights and sounds and feelings from a lifetime ago. I was no longer in that pristine Florida kitchen. I was back in Boston, in a small, dusty office. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and Robert's pipe smoke. It was a humid July afternoon, the kind where the air sits heavy and still, promising a storm that never comes. Robert was at his desk, his face grim, his usually jovial expression clouded with a quiet fury. Across from him sat his business partner, Charles Miller. Charles had been Robert's best friend since college. They had started their little manufacturing business together, on a handshake and a dream. But now Charles's face was pale. His hands were shaking as he held a letter. "Robert," Charles was saying, his voice full of a desperate pleading. "Please, I just need a short-term loan, a bridge. My wife, Helen, she's been so sick. The medical bills, they've just drained us dry. We've put everything into this company, but the bank, they're saying they're going to foreclose on our house next week." I had been there, standing in the doorway, pretending to be busy with some papers. But I had heard every word. I had seen the look of utter panic in Charles's eyes. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking for a lifeline, a bit of help from his best friend. I looked at Robert. His face was a mask of stoic resolve, but I knew him. I saw the struggle in his eyes. He had the money to help. Our own rainy day fund was more than enough. But there was something in his pride, his unwavering belief that a man should pull himself up by his bootstraps, that made him hesitate. And there was something in me, a voice that whispered about our own financial security, about the risk of losing what we had worked so hard for, that stayed silent. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching my husband's pride win out over his compassion. Robert shook his head, his voice low and regretful. "Charles, I wish I could, but we've invested everything back into the business. I just can't risk it. We have to be smart, for the future." The words weren't a direct refusal, but the meaning was clear. The storm that had been brewing on Charles's face finally broke. He stood up, his dignity crumbling around him. "Smart? Robert, your smart is going to leave my family on the street. I thought we were partners. I thought we were friends." He dropped the letter on the desk and walked out of the room, leaving a painful, hollow silence in his wake. He lost everything. His house, his dignity, his health. He died just a few years later, a broken man. And we never talked about it again. The memory was a ghost that haunted our marriage, a silent space between us, a secret shame we both carried. We had been smart. We had kept our money. And we had paid for it with a friendship and a man's life. I came back to the present with a gasp, my hands shaking. The Florida sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent, mocking witness. I looked at Jessica, a young, exhausted woman who was still standing at the kitchen counter, her head now bowed again. I had judged her for a moment of desperate brilliance, for an act of selfless love that I had completely misunderstood. But it was worse than that. My judgment of her was a mirror. It was me standing in judgment of myself, of a younger, crueler version of myself that had stood silently by while my husband's cold pride destroyed a man. I had always thought of myself as a good person, a quiet, kind woman, but my kindness had been selective. It had been safe. When it had mattered, when a real person was in crisis, I had chosen my own security. I was no better than the woman I had just punished. Not a single bit. I had lived a lie about my own character and the character of my late husband. And that lie had just been exposed, not by another person, but by my own memory. I stood there, staring at the woman I had just accused, and saw a reflection of the younger, crueler me I had long forgotten. My quest for justice had just led me to the last place on earth I ever wanted to be, face to face with my own unforgiven past. The storm of emotions had passed, leaving behind a strange, fragile peace. The morning after my painful confession and my even more painful revelation, the atmosphere in the Florida house had shifted. The tense, oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a quiet, shared determination. Jessica and I moved around each other like two strangers who had just survived a shipwreck, our actions synchronized, our words sparse but meaningful. The conflict was over, but the work of repair had just begun. I started by calling my bank. The kind, professional woman on the other end, bless her heart, had no idea she was a part of a personal drama of such magnitude. I explained the situation with an old woman's rambling politeness, stating that I had made an unusual transfer to my daughter-in-law's account and that the subsequent lock on her accounts was a misunderstanding. The bank representative was skeptical, but ultimately agreed to expedite the release of the funds. I then went to Jessica, who was sitting with a coffee and a tablet, her face pale with exhaustion. "The account should be unfrozen within the hour," I said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Jessica. I really am." She looked up at me, a flicker of something new in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something deeper, more complicated, a dawning recognition that I had finally, truly seen her. She simply nodded and went back to her tablet, her fingers tapping at a frantic pace. This new communication, this silent understanding was more profound than any angry conversation. We had bypassed the superficial anger and landed on the raw reality of the situation. We were now in this together. I spent the next hour in Michael's room. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand, feeling the thin, familiar bones of his wrist. I wasn't praying for a miracle anymore. I was praying for a chance to make things right. It was a new kind of prayer, one of atonement, not of desire. I looked at the man he had become, a quiet hero who had shouldered the impossible burden of his illness and protected his family from the knowledge of it. And then I looked at the ghosts in my own mind, the young woman I had been, who had let her own son suffer under the weight of his father's pride. The shame was a constant companion, but it was also a powerful motivator. I called Arthur, our family lawyer, a man who had handled everything from Robert's will to my annual tax returns for the past 40 years. His voice, when he answered, was as dry and comforting as a good glass of scotch. "Evelyn, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he said, a note of surprise in his voice. I hadn't called him in years. "Arthur, I need a favor," I said, my voice low and serious. "I need you to find someone, a man named Charles Miller. He was a business partner of Robert's back in the day. He lost everything in the early 80s. His house, his business, everything." Arthur was quiet on the other end of the line. Lawyers, I've learned, are like good doctors. They hear what you don't say. "I remember him, Evelyn, a good man. What's this about? Is this for the estate?" "No," I said, looking over at Michael's sleeping form. This is for me. For something Robert and I should have done a very long time ago. He had a daughter, I think. I need to find her. I need to know what happened to them." Arthur's voice, when he spoke again, was gentle. "I'll do my best. It's been a long time, but I have my ways. You sound different, Evelyn." "I am," I said simply. "I am." I hung up the phone, a strange lightness in my chest. For the first time since I had walked into that silent house, my focus was not on the pain of the present, but on the possibility of a better future,
one built not on judgment and bitterness, but on a quiet act of grace. I had spent a lifetime holding on to a lie that had now brought me face to face with my own ugly reflection. But now, with a single phone call, I had begun to make amends, not just for my mistake with Jessica, but for the mistake of a lifetime ago. My journey was no longer about revenge, it was about redemption. The work was just beginning and it felt right. The shame was still there, but now it had a purpose. It was no longer a weight. It was a compass, pointing me toward a path I never knew I was meant to walk. But what I was about to find out, the full story of what happened to Charles and his family, was an even deeper, more complex tragedy than I had imagined.
The days that followed were a blur of phone calls and hushed conversations. Jessica, now with her funds restored and her dignity slowly returning, was a force of nature. She was on the phone constantly, speaking with doctors and specialists, her voice a low murmur of medical terms and logistics. I watched her from a distance, amazed by her resilience. The desperate girl from a few mornings ago had been replaced by a competent, focused woman, a true partner in this quiet war. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There were no more apologies, no more recriminations. We had reached a silent understanding, a bridge built on my newfound humility and her quiet acceptance. 2 days later, Arthur called me. His voice on the phone was solemn. I found her, Evelyn, Charles's daughter. Her name is Rose. He left a paper trail a mile long, looking for help. It was easy to track down. She's living just outside of Tucson, Arizona. She's a widow, just like you. Her husband was a teacher. She's raising her 2 grandchildren now. Her daughter passed away a few years ago. Rose works a part-time job as a cashier to make ends meet. The information landed like a punch to my gut. The tragedy wasn't just Charles. It was a ripple effect, a domino chain that had stretched over 40 years, a legacy of quiet suffering that my husband and I had unknowingly set in motion. Charles's daughter was now living with the consequences of our cold pride, a ghost from the past still carrying the burden of his failure. I closed my eyes, a fresh wave of shame washing over me. All those years I had held on to a secret fund that could have saved them, that could have stopped this cascade of suffering. The money, a symbol of my quiet rebellion, now felt like a testament to my ultimate moral cowardice. I told Arthur to get in touch with her, but not to tell her about me. I told him to arrange for a large sum of money to be transferred to a trust in her name, a trust for her grandchildren's education and for her own comfort. It's to be an anonymous donation, Arthur, I said, my voice firm, from a grateful friend. No names, no strings attached. Arthur, to his credit, didn't ask questions. He simply said, "As you wish, Evelyn. It will be done by the end of the day." And just like that, with a few clicks and a handful of numbers, I was doing what I should have done a lifetime ago. The money I had frozen, the money that had been meant for revenge, was now being used for atonement. The legacy Robert had left me wasn't about the money itself. It was the chance to right a wrong. I had been so convinced that my husband's legacy was the secret fund, the practical security he had given me. But it wasn't. It was this moment, this chance to use that security to give a stranger a new chance at life. The greatest love he had shown me was in giving me the power to become a better person. My conversation with Arthur was the first step on a long road to forgiveness. My journey of healing had begun not with a grand act of defiance, but with a quiet, humble phone call. It was no longer about winning or losing. It was about seeing the invisible suffering in the world
and choosing to do something about it. I was a different woman now, a woman who understood that true strength wasn't about holding on to your secrets, but about using them to help others. But the most important call I made that week wasn't to a lawyer or a doctor. It was to a woman I had never met, and I had no idea how she would react.
I sat on the edge of Michael's bed, the silence between us heavy but no longer filled with judgment. It was a silence of anticipation, a silence that held the weight of a confession. Jessica had gone out to get some groceries, giving us this precious final time alone. Michael's breathing was a little more labored now, a quiet, rhythmic wheeze that marked the passing of each minute. He was awake, his eyes clear and surprisingly alert, fixed on the distant ceiling fan. "Michael," I began, my voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you. Everything you think you know, it's not the whole story." He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. They were the same startling blue as his father's, the same eyes that I had seen look at me with pride, with worry, with an unconditional love that had always been my anchor. His expression was one of quiet understanding, as if he had been waiting for me to say this. I started at the beginning, from the moment I had found him, the scent of lilies and medicine in the air, to the moment I had read the invitation to the yacht party. I described my rage, the cold, righteous anger that had possessed me, the feeling of empowerment as I had frozen Jessica's accounts. I confessed to my terrible mistake, the blind fury that had caused me to punish the woman who was fighting for him with every ounce of her strength. I watched his face as I spoke, and I saw a flicker of sadness, but no anger, only a deep, abiding weariness. "And then," I continued, my voice barely a whisper, "I found out the truth, that the party wasn't for fun, that she was fighting for you, Michael, that she had mortgaged this house and sold her own jewelry just to keep you alive. She was a hero, my son, and I was a fool." A fresh wave of shame washed over me, but I forced myself to continue. "But it's worse than that," I said, and then I told him about Charles Miller. I told him about the day in Robert's office, about the pride that had blinded us, about the friend we had left to ruin. I told him how Jessica's words were a mirror, showing me a cruelty in myself that I had long ago forgotten. He closed his eyes for a moment, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down his temple. "Dad, he was never able to forget that," he whispered, his voice weak. "He never told you, but I heard him on the phone once, years ago. He was trying to find Charles, trying to make it right, but he couldn't. The trail was too cold." My heart ached. The secret shame I thought it was only mine had also been Robert's, and he had carried it in a silent quest for atonement that had been lost to time. "I found him," I said, my own voice breaking. "Well, I've found her daughter, Rose. She's a widow, raising her grandchildren. Arthur found her for me, and I made it right, Michael. I used the money from that fund Robert gave me, the one for my whimsy. I gave it to her, anonymously. For them, it's a start." A fragile smile touched his lips. He reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "Mom," he said, his voice stronger now, "you are so much more than you ever thought you were. It wasn't just Robert's pride, it was his shame, too. And you took his last regret and turned it into his final act of kindness. That's a beautiful thing." He looked at me and then at the door as if he could see Jessica out there, and the love in his eyes was so profound it took my breath away. She's not just a hero, Mom. She's an angel. She sacrificed everything to give me these last few months with you. Please, forgive her. Not for you, but for me. She deserves so much more than my pride could give her." A quiet sob escaped me, a sound I had not made since Robert's death. This was what I had come for. This quiet absolution. This was the moment where my self-righteousness was finally stripped away, revealing the real me, the one who was capable of great love and terrible mistakes, but who was willing, finally, to do the work to make things right. My son's gentle acceptance was the balm I had been searching for. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the heart. And in that moment, I understood what it was to truly forgive and to be truly forgiven. And that was a far greater treasure than any secret fund. Michael's final days were peaceful. He had found a new kind of rest, a quiet acceptance. Jessica and I, now a united front, sat with him, our hands intertwined. There were no more angry words, no more accusations, only quiet moments of shared grief and silent prayers. We talked about memories, about the smell of old pines in our yard in Boston, about the summer Michael learned to ride a bike, about the perfect, fleeting happiness of a simpler time. Michael passed away in his sleep, a gentle, peaceful sound, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. There was no grand drama, no last words, only a final, quiet stillness. It was a bittersweet ending, a beautiful sorrow, a gift of grace in the face of inevitable loss. The funeral was small, just a few close friends and family. Jessica was a pillar of strength, her face pale, but her eyes serene. Our family was shocked when they learned of Michael's long-kept illness. They were even more shocked when they learned that Jessica had orchestrated a secret, high-stakes fundraiser to save him. The conversations I overheard were filled with a kind of awe. The girl they had always dismissed as a trophy wife was suddenly a warrior. And I, the quiet, predictable mother, was a woman they no longer recognized. My secret had been revealed, but not in the way I had planned. The financial revenge I had sought was replaced by a quiet, moral act. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the Florida house to pack Michael's things. The grief was a constant companion, but it was now a shared one, a soft ache that drew me and Jessica closer rather than pushing us apart. We went through his old boxes, the things he had held on to from his childhood. I found a worn baseball mitt and a dusty photo album. And in that album, tucked between two faded pictures, was a small, fragile envelope. Inside was a note in Robert's handwriting. "To Evelyn, my final act of love is giving you the chance to use this as I should have a long time ago. Find Charles, make it right." The tears came, not from sorrow, but from a profound, humbling realization. Robert's last wish wasn't for me to hold on to the money, but for me to use it to heal the wounds he had caused. He had known, all along. And now I would honor his legacy, not with a bank account, but with an act of grace. I called Arthur. I told him to set up a foundation in Robert's name dedicated to helping families who were struggling with the financial burden of rare diseases. Michael's death, I realized, wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new one, a legacy of compassion born from the bitter soil of my own mistakes. I decided to stay in Florida. The house was no longer a tomb of secrets and lies. It was a home. Jessica and I, we were a family now, a strange, broken, but ultimately beautiful family. We had nothing to inherit. The money was gone, a testament to what we had lost and what we had found. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all. I sit on the porch now, watching the Florida sun set over the distant ocean, the air warm and thick with the scent of salt water and regret. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. There was no miraculous cure. The man I loved was gone, but something inside me, something cold and hardened, had been washed away by the tides. I learned that true fortune isn't measured in dollars, but in the quiet, gentle strength it takes to forgive yourself. The legacy you leave behind isn't about what you keep, but about what you give away. And in the end, it was my own foolish pride that it brought me here, but it was kindness that had finally set me free.